Welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and what a delight to have back with us today David Bernstein. He's a law professor at the George Mason University and the author of a must-read book entitled Lawless, and the Obama administration's unprecedented assault on the Constitution and the rule of law, to say the least. And we want to talk to him today about Justice Scalia's death and the vacancy that it now has on the court. So, David, good to see you. How you doing, my friend?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. Thanks for being with us. Well, we're in some uncharted waters, with the passing of Justice Scalia. How do you think this is going to impact the election?
Well, I think the first impact it's going to have is probably on the Republican presidential race for the primaries, because if you look at who the candidates are, it doesn't seem to me that Donald Trump has really thought much about the Constitution, has much interest in the Constitution. I joke that he may think the U.S. Constitution is a luxury yacht. On the other hand, his leading competitor right now is Ted Cruz, who's been studying the Constitution since he was in high school, former Harvard Law School graduate, former Supreme Court clerk, former Attorney General, or Solicitor General, I should say, of Texas, argued many cases before the court, a constitutional expert. And I think if he plays it right, this should really help his campaign, because if you want to think who might be in charge of replacing Scalia in the future, I think Republican voters would much rather have it be Cruz.
Oh. So what happens now with the cases that are in that the court is now looking at? They've already made their decision on some. Do those cases stand with those decisions? And what happens until they fill the vacancy on the court?
The court really has two choices. Most cases are not 5-4. Most cases are decided by some other ratio. So for all those cases, the court could just continue its business and decide cases 6-2 or 7-1 or 8-0, and that's not a problem. The problem will come with the cases that would have been 5-4 with Scalia casting the deciding vote. And those cases, of course, now will be 4-4, and the court has two choices. They could just issue 4-4 opinions, in which case the lower court opinion will stand, and that will be the law in the lower court jurisdictions until a new case could be brought. But more likely for the really controversial cases, they're probably going to put those cases on hold if there's a 4-4 vote and wait until there's a new justice, then have them re-argued.
All right. Now, the big battle is whether or not, what happens now? The president, by Constitution, should nominate somebody. But on the other hand, it's also been somewhat a practice when you have the last term president, especially this place in his term, in a presidential election, to wait to the next president. What do you think on that?
Well, I think that the Republicans would be really foolish to do anything except delay. I don't think it was especially smart politically to announce we're not going to confirm anybody, no matter who, because Obama could surprise them and appoint and nominate someone who actually may be very confirmable, who some people have talked about having at least Sandra Day O'Connor as a temporary replacement. It'd be hard for the Republicans to vote against her. But look, there's no obligation for the Republicans to confirm anybody that they don't like. It is an election year. This could be part of the election. And the fact is, President Obama, to the extent he's asking for basically senatorial courtesy or for his opinion, for his decision, for the senators to defer to him, this is a president who has taken every opportunity to go around Congress in every possible way. And given the lack of respect he's shown for the Senate, there's really no reason for the Senate to be particularly deferential here.
In your opinion, David, how big of a loss is it to lose Justice Scalia?
Well, Justice Scalia was really a giant of the court. He really changed American jurisprudence in many ways, both on constitutional issues and in other interpretive methodologies, like really looking closely at the text of the statutes that are before them, which wasn't done in the past. But on the other hand, I don't think he's, in a sense, irreplaceable. I think that he's been on the court, he was on the court, I should say, for almost 30 years, and he said what he had to say. He had his influence. It would be interesting to have someone from a new generation who might have slightly different ideas to make their contribution too. So he made a great contribution. The more troubling aspect is that there are a lot of issues that were 5-4, Second Amendment, First Amendment, federalism, and I fear that if the Democrats get to appoint the fifth justice, a lot of these rights that we have, a lot of principles that Justice Scalia stood for will go away.
As a law professor there at George Mason University, who would you like to see in that place?
I think there are lots of good potential candidates. Actually, if Senator Cruz loses the nomination, I think he'd be a great Supreme Court justice. For one, there's Miguel Estrada, who is not a judge right now, but a lawyer. They tried to appoint him to the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeals. The Democrats filibustered it, and he never did make it. But he's a very sound lawyer. And I'm sure there are other names that will come up as well. But what you really want is someone who has a sound judicial philosophy that won't be swayed by the winds of politics or public opinion.
Let me go political with you just for a moment. It seems to be a national disgrace that the president wouldn't adjust his schedule to attend Justice Scalia's funeral. What's your take on that?
I find that really puzzling. I mean, I'm a law professor, not a political analyst, but if you're trying to get the Republicans to confirm a nominee that you were going to have, and then try to put political pressure on them, you try to depoliticize the situation and claim, there should be deference here. The Supreme Court is not supposed to be a political office. I'm going to appoint someone moderate and you should confirm them. You would think the last thing the president would do would be to leave himself open to the charge of being disrespectful to Justice Scalia. Obviously, Justice Scalia was a controversial man and wrote a lot of things that the president disagreed with, but everyone acknowledges that he loved his country, he loved the Constitution, he did what he thought was right to the best he could. And I think it would have been, if not a magnanimous gesture, at least a gesture of politeness and bipartisanship for the president to have gone to the funeral. And I think this actually I've actually thought for a while, you mentioned my book, Lawless. One thing I talk about there is I really think the president comes from an elite liberal culture where they really have contempt for people who are right of center. They think they're either stupid or evil or both. I have a feeling that President Obama deep down thinks that Justice Scalia obviously wasn't stupid, but maybe he was just evil and he really shouldn't grace his funeral with his presence.
Very interesting. All right. So constitutionally, the president has an obligation to nominate somebody. There's some scenarios. They can delay, not do hearings, delay confirmation hearings, or they could actually put it forth for a vote and vote the nominee down. Is that risky?
That may be risky because if the person is very well spoken and is well liked in Washington and elsewhere, that may put pressure on the Republicans to vote for him or her, as the case may be. But I think actually that the president is, by tradition, if not by constitution, entitled to a vote. I think if I were just giving sort of law professor advice rather than political advice, I'd say, look, the president sends someone hold hearings, but ask the person, why should we, given that all the liberal justices who've been appointed for the last 50, 60 years have all been against Second Amendment rights, have always voted in favor of federal power when there's a question of state-federal relations, have always voted to allow affirmative action preferences in higher education and contracting, and so forth and so on. Is there any reason to believe that you won't be the same down-the-line liberal on all of these issues that these other justices have been? If so, why should we appoint somebody whose constitutional philosophy is at odds with our own? And of course, the candidate will answer, I can't talk about pending cases. And I think the Republicans should say that's just not acceptable. With so many issues hanging by a 5-to-4 thread, they should demand answers. And the answers shouldn't be, I'm going to decide this way in this particular case, but here's why you should trust my judicial philosophy. And I doubt there's really anyone that President Obama is willing to nominate that would have a proper judicial philosophy.
Yeah. I think you're right on that. All right, so given the fact that this president, and you wrote about it, lawless, we have a lawless president that has really thwarted the Constitution and has learned the secret of how to govern through executive order. Is it irreparable? There are points of no return. And I think on some issues, we may be getting pretty close to them. I think that the nomination situation may be another step. Here's the problem. When the president exhibits disrespect for Congress and the separation of powers by using executive orders, by ignoring congressional statutes, as he's done several times, issuing executive orders on immigration, on Common Core, and just going over circumventing the process, the Republicans have every incentive, and indeed they should retaliate by not giving the president deference. But of course, this becomes
problematic in the long term if neither side can ever step back. So I'd really like to see, and we could start with the confirmation process for judges. What I'd love to see is the Republicans sit down with the Democrats and say, okay, look, we're not going to confirm whoever President Obama nominates, but neither of us know who's going to win in 2016. It's 50-50, let's say. So let's set some ground rules for the next president, whoever that might be, we don't know, and we'll both agree publicly to stick to those ground rules, and we'll start to walk away from the brink of confrontation and ignoring the separation of powers.
That's a nice thing. Do you think it could happen?
You know, I think the problem is that the Democrats, as of right now, are not going to be willing to do anything that's for the future because they want their guy or their lady confirmed before January. But I think if things come around to July, August, that's pretty clear that Obama's not getting his nominee through. It's possible. There have been compromises before. There was a compromise to avoid filibustering of lower court nominees that was promulgated by the so-called Gang of 13, bipartisan group of senators who wanted to de-escalate matters on confirmation. I think it's possible to do it in other areas too, but you can't do it with regard to this current president. The well's been poisoned for this administration. You have to make agreements for the future.
All right, kind of skipping ship just a little bit here. Do you think Hillary's in legal trouble?
I think she is in legal trouble. The real question is, the FBI has been investigating, the Justice Department has been investigating, and there's going to be inevitably a conflict between the political appointees, including the Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney Generals, who are not going to want to seriously investigate, much less indict, the Democratic frontrunner in the middle of an election campaign. But the word on the street, so to speak, is that the civil servants, the career people, are very disturbed by all these revelations that Senator Clinton was sending all sorts of unclassified emails on unsecured servers. I'll tell you, my wife was in the Foreign Service, and this is the kind of thing that will get you fired if you do it once or twice, much less if you do it hundreds of times. And people had to know this, and it was done not just negligently, but I think in an attempt to keep these emails from the American people, to keep them from being foilable. So really, Clinton violated the law on numerous occasions to the real detriment of American national security for partisan political purposes. And if it turns out that she broke the law and there's proof of it, which it seems to be, I don't see how you could not indict her. And if so, the question will be, will the civil servants push back if the political people refuse to do anything about it? Will they threaten to resign? Will they threaten to go public? We'll have to see.
Interesting. Well, Professor, you've given us a lot to think about. Let's stay in touch. I really appreciate your viewpoint, and the best to you. Now, if people want to read some of your writings, do they just Google you there at George Mason University?
Sure, David Bernstein, George Mason, or they could look up my name on Amazon, and they could see a selection of my books there as well.
Thanks, my friend. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Over.
I'm Paulina Leiser, producer of Focus Today. Thank you for watching this video, and make sure to check our other videos at theDove.us.